Killer Shoot presents.
Krisalis was founded under the name of Tech Software in 1987 by 3 former employees of Gremlin, coders Pete Harrop and Sean Hollingsworth, and sales and marketing guy Tony Kavanagh. Krisalis made some important contributions to football gaming over the years, but we have to start back at their, let's call them humble beginnings. Peter Beardsley's International Soccer was released in 1988, still under the Tech brand. Here you get to choose from 8 different national teams and then it's straight off to the pitch. I remember thinking this game looked really good on the back of the box, but when it starts moving it's a different story. The power bar is a nice addition, although it takes forever to fill. The physics are really strange. The ball seems to accelerate away from the player running at full speed, and the goals have no net on the Amiga. The C64 version had nets, even the Spectrum version had nets. I love how the crowd in the background looks like they're just crammed into livestock pens. Maybe that's why they're not moving. It's really fitting to end this segment with an own goal, because that's what the press felt that this game was. But the harsh reception for the Amiga version was nothing compared to the keel hauling that the C64 version got. Then, just as the dominant reign of Sir Alex was about to take off, Krisalis secured the license of the biggest football club in the world. This time, founder Pete Harrop took the reins himself. He was already well on the way to becoming an industry legend for creating Monty Mole on the Spectrum. This is a very ambitious game. Clearly, a lot of effort was put into making sure it would not be one of the many license games of the times that were best forgotten. The United players all had mugshots, like Mark Hughes here, and Captain Marvel. Neil Webb looks like he's 12 years old, and Lee Sharp probably is about 12 years old. Danny Wallace, great underrated striker. Clayton Blackmore, the most versatile player on the early Sir Alex squads. And Steve Bruce looks about the same as he does 30 years later. Once you get that squad on the pitch, you find a decent side-on footy game here. The sprites are detailed and they're rather well animated. The controls are basic, but it controls very well. Even though the graphics took a big step forward, they're still a bit naive in this game. The vast improvements over Peter Beardsley's International Soccer are very evident here. And 30 years later, we should all be very thankful that Peter Harrop took to creating soccer games. He's well outside the box. Come on, ref, that's not a penalty. At least now we get to see this neat goal animation. Notice how the ad boards have both Tech and Krisalis banners. Typical Krisalis attention to details, the ref has to carry the ball back to the center circle. You can buy and sell players in the management part, but only from this set list of players. At least there are some cool nostalgic players to choose from. Wow, so Wolves turns down 4 million quid for Steve Bull in 1990. At least we can buy Paul Parker and complete a classic United lineup. This game got a much warmer reception than poor Peter Beardsley. This is exactly as it should. This was a much better game, and it was also the beginning of a line of terrific football games. And the first outing for a match engine that looks unmistakably Krisalis. Next up is Manchester United Europe in 1991. This saw the team add graphics artist Neil Adamson, described by co-workers as the best artist at Krisalis, to the team. With Adamson on the ball, the graphics finally got that distinctive Krisalis look. In this game you get to choose which of the European Cups to compete in, and if you win one of them you get to compete in the World Club Cup. The match engine took a big step forward. The sprites were more realistic and they were big enough that players actually wore the right number on their backs. View was zoomed out and allowed for some good football, and the pace was slow enough that build-up play was possible. The AI opposition actually gave you a run for your money and even used the wings and crosses. But the goalkeepers had problems with shots from certain positions. You could score some great headed goals in this game. Weird thing about this match engine is no one ever sets up any walls to defend free kicks. Look at Maldonado getting carded for talking to the ref. That's a pretty cool feature. You can even see the ref writing on the card. The tactic setup is very basic and the players have no mugshots here. At least the game gives us the option to move Steve Bruce away from the right wing position that he defaults to. The squad selection screen seems a bit rushed and options are very limited compared to the previous game. Andrei Konchelskis, anyone? Manchester United Europe got decent reviews, while still being put on a tier below the senses and kickoffs. Reviewers liked the graphics and sound, the pace, and the wealth of options like the 4-player mode. The TV-style presentation really sets a nice atmosphere for the game. First game of the Cup Winners' Cup and we're playing the pesky monks. All in all, this is a great football game, although the management options are a bit limited. But Krisalis had now put their football boots on proper and had 2 more huge licenses lined up for the coming year. The first of these 2 licenses was England and Liverpool left winger John Barnes. Barnes was a prolific finisher and he was equally good with both feet, making him a formidable weapon on the wing. He was a modern type of winger that was way ahead of his time. The game, of course, is John Barnes' European Football from 1992, a tie-in with the 1992 Euros in Sweden, no less. It may be confusing for some that you cannot play as eventual winner Denmark. You can only play as one of the 7 teams that qualified or Sweden as the host. Denmark replaced Yugoslavia late in the process because Yugoslavia was disqualified because of the Yugoslav War. There are a lot of options to set in the menus, like turning the weather on and off. The weather effects in this game were really cool for its time, with rain and thunder. You can also set the game to use a 2-button controller. I have a third-party Mega Drive controller which works really well on the Amiga as well. The tactics options in this game are limited to picking from one of 6 different formations before the game. There is no way to change your lineup before the game and you have to start with what the game gives you. After we pick tactics, it's off to the pitch. The players are presented TV style as they run on. Look at those eager coaches, urging them to attack even before the game starts. I wish the game was more zoomed out. You kind of have to guess where your teammates are or look at the scanner. John Barnes scores early for England. With a zoomed in view, the game's pace is frantic. They've even removed the numbers from the back of the players to make it move even faster. It's a hard game and I'm getting run over by an overpowered England team. That's funny. That's not how I remember Euro 92 at all.
There's a zest about Sweden now, which is very impressive indeed. Brolin, Dahlin. That is glorious! Absolutely glorious!
The presentation is again great, and the gameplay is another step forward. It is a bit on the hard side though. The substitution process is very detailed. You send your guy off from the bench to warm up, and he actually runs up and down the pitch at the top of the screen. The player that comes on takes off his jacket, and the player coming off puts it on and sits down on the empty spot on the bench. The substitutions gets annoying after a while, but it's still those details that makes the presentation stand out. Now that Jean-Pierre Papin has put that penalty away, you can see the cool goal celebration and the crowd is actually animated now. John Barnes' European Football runs a lot faster than Manchester United Europe, and the game's frantic pace makes it harder to play and a lot less tactical. This game takes a lot of practice before you can beat the computer, but I still loved it back then. In hindsight, Man U Europe is a better footy game though. The review scores reflect this, and this game gets generally lower reviews than its predecessor, with a combination of a narrow view and frantic pace as the big drawback, and the atmosphere as the big plus. The other big Krisalis licensed game in 1992 was Graham Taylor's Soccer Challenge. Graham Taylor was at this time managing England. Before England, he had been at Watford, where he also managed John Barnes. So Barnes and Taylor had crossed paths both for club and country, and now they did as licenses for Krisalis. Once again, as with Krisalis' earlier licensed games, this is an ambitious management simulation and not just a license cash-in. You can edit players and clubs at the start of the game, but the database is a pretty accurate representation of the English league system in 1992. The game comes on 2 discs, and it's split into 2 different parts, with disc 1 being the club management part and disc 2 being international management. So when you think about it, the object of the first part of the game is actually to steal Graham Taylor's job. To be offered the job of managing England, you have to finish in the top 5 positions in the top division. But the real idea of this game is not to build a 3rd division club into a European powerhouse. It's about building your career, taking new jobs, and finally ending up at the top of the hill. The real hub of this game is actually not the main menu, it's this diary where you set training and you book friendlies, and it's also used to advance through the dates of the game. Training has to be set manually, it won't copy over from week to week, and every time you train you have to select the training. The type of training can't be preset, and this is a pretty annoying feature. Well, once you've set your training and you've picked your team, you go to the match. These matches are presented in a zoomed-in overhead view, which is normally not the best combination. You can tell it's pretty much the same engine as John Barnes, only with a different view. I have no idea why they switched the views, but I can only assume that Krisalis felt that an overhead view would suit a management game better. The match action itself is actually very enjoyable, even if it's a little hard to see any tactics with that zoomed-in view. I did manage to unlock the international section back in the day, but this time around I was too lazy. The WHD installer allows you to skip directly to the international section, so I did that. You start the international section off with a default England squad, comprised of pretty much the usual suspects. You can change your squad by picking players from the top 2 divisions, or amongst English players playing abroad, which in 1992 were not a lot. There are thousands of players and no indication of which players are actually English, and of course you can't pick foreigners. Well, actually you can pick some foreigners. I suspect he just hadn't declared for Wales yet. Thankfully, you have a team of scouts to send out to scout players for you or to scout the opposition for the upcoming qualifiers. You can also view any matchup you want from the top 2 divisions, and this is really a fun way to scout players, because sometimes watching a player on the pitch just tells you more than his stat sheet, even in a management game like this. When it's all said and done, this is about picking the best team, then going out to the pitch and watching Alan Shearer set the international stage on fire. Reviews were generally favorable, citing depth, detail and complexity on the plus side, while complaining about the crappy manual, which is just a flimsy piece of paper. And now for something completely different. I felt I had to put Soccer Kid in here. The World Cup trophy gets stolen and blown to pieces by aliens. And you play as that annoying kid we all had in our neighborhood growing up. The annoying kid is on a mission to collect the 5 missing pieces of the World Cup from different parts of the world and bring them back. You run around the streets with a football as your weapon, being a complete nuisance to man and beast alike. This is an unforgiving platformer that came on 5 discs. So there's a lot of this and a lot of this. The game's concept was actually conceived by Krisalis' music wizard Matt Furniss. Now, I never cared for this game, but the press, they absolutely loved it. And then we're back to Man United and we're approaching the very peak of Krisalis football gaming. So let's go straight onto the pitch. Wait, what? Did I put my Sensible Soccer discs in by accident? Well, actually, while the look is very similar to certain other games of those times, there are enough differences that this game really deserves a lot of praise on its own. The view is a little more zoomed out and the players are a little better proportioned than players in rival games. According to previews of the game, these gameplay details were a very deliberate way of making the game more realistic and more tactical. Another big selling point was the new tactic grid system, which I absolutely loved, but more on that later. Man United Premier League Champions has a fully fledged management mode where up to 4 players can take part in hot seat action. You can pick any team from the English league system to manage, not just Man United. But if you do pick Man United, all the Man United players have these really cool cartoony mugshots. I get nostalgic just from looking at them. Overall, it's great to just click around this very well made database to relive all the classic squads from 25 years ago. If you go to lesser teams though, they will only have generic player pictures. There's the general variety of hair color and skin color, but if you're a white guy with dark hair, you look exactly like that guy from Wing Commander. Not even John Barnes got his face in the game. And now we've reached one of my favorite features of these late Krisalis football games, the tactic grid system. The tactic grid is basically a happy medium between games where you could just pick a formation and the games that employed a zone-based tactics editor, which was very popular at the time, in games like Player Manager or European Champions or Swiss. The general idea behind the tactic grid, which you can read about in the previews, is that it's trying to recreate instructions that an actual manager would give a player. That is, not telling a player exactly where to stand when the ball is in a particular spot, but to tell a player in general terms how to play their position and then rely on the AI to carry those instructions out. The tactic grid system worked really well. You could tell the difference between a player you've told to stay back or a player you're told to push forward in the same position. While using the tactic grid, I never felt like I wanted zones back. The match engine is great. I sure had a lot of fun with it. I actually prefer this over Sensi. Unfortunately, Sensible Soccer is all everyone remembers. This game is less accessible than Sensible Soccer. In that regard, it's more like Kickoff 2. You have a much steeper hill to climb if you want to master this, but to me it's sure worth the trek. The new match engine is the best thing about this game, but the management section is not bad. It's a decent management game, with the normal set of bells and whistles like selling and buying. I feel like this game helped set a new standard for football games, where the players on the pitch would not just follow a set tactical pattern, but would actually try to play the game of football. As previously mentioned, it has a steep learning curve, much like John Barnes, but it's very worth the effort. Once you get into it, it's a really solid football game. The press did, at large, agree with my assessment of this game. It got great reviews. It was considered a worthy challenger for the top spot of footy games. Naturally, expectations for the sequel were sky high. Well, my expectations were anyway. Unfortunately, the management section is more or less just a database update from Premier League Champions, and the United players don't have their cool mugshots in this. The tactic grid is back in all its glory, but why are United starting Parker and May in the middle, and Bruce and Pallister at fullback? This game is played from an isometric perspective. This was all the rave in the mid-90s for a couple of years, in the wake of the success of the first FIFA game. Other established games also tried this approach, with the likes of Player Manager 2 also providing the ability to watch games in an isometric view. The isometric view works really well for this game. I feel like you have a lot more control over your crosses and your headers, both offensively and defensively in this game over PLC. The game's controls also feels tighter, and I think it's easier to control than the predecessor. I prefer this match engine to the previous one, and as you will see in the reviews, this does not echo the popular opinion at the time. This is the final game that Krisalis did with the Man United license. But before we leave the Man United series, we'll have to go on a short side quest for some oddities. There is actually a SNES hybrid called Manchester United Championship Soccer. And in this game you can actually change between the views of Premier League champions and the double by pressing the select button. In Germany this was released as Lothar Matthäus Super Soccer, but Lothar Matthäus seems to have been the only licensed name in the game. So do you want to play as the Frankfurt Schwarzrot or the München Rot? Me neither. The game divided the press. Reviewers either loved it or hated it. I found no reviews with scores between 60 and 80, only under or over. I need to check out Soccer Superstars, it looks delightfully shitty. The management section would survive to the next license, which was the Professional Footballers Association, the PFA. This was actually a very promising management game, with a FIFA-inspired isometric match engine, with the option of playing your career as a player or a manager. But unfortunately, despite all the promise, this game just feels unfinished. Even if you choose to play as a player, you can still buy and sell players for your club. You can even sell yourself. And at match day you could completely destroy your opponent by changing their tactics before the game. Which is what I'm doing in this clip in the otherwise great Tactic Grid 2, which I guess technically was not a grid anymore, but it allowed for freer placement of your players and adjustment of the zones for defense, midfield and attack. We're nearing the end of our journey, but we have a few more stops before we arrive. In '97, Krisalis released a game under the UEFA Champions League license published by Philips Media. In this game you could play the Champions League 96-97 or custom leagues with clubs teams or international teams. It featured kind of a mini version of the Tactic Grid that did not have all the features of the previous games. It did however feature a promising new match engine. Presented in very crisp 3D and running at a decent pace with motion capture of two Sheffield Wednesday players, this engine immediately shows off some impressive AI, with teams actually using build-up play to get forward, players know how to use space and how to use the wings. I felt like the controls weren't completely up to par. I never really liked playing this game, but I loved to coach in it and I loved to watch the matches. This engine had some weird but hilarious glitches. Just look at Dahlin blasting the ball through the net here. I guess that's why the Germans called him Schweden Bombo. And just look at Thomas Ravelli reading this penalty early. That's some top-notch goalkeeping. For being Krisalis' first attempt at a 3D match engine, this is really good. And it seems to produce some really realistic scores as well. The game only has 16 club teams as default, but you can easily add your own custom teams in the editor. You can change everything from team name, the name of the ground, the name of the manager, and add players with a pretty detailed profile editor. You also have plenty of options for editing the kit, but I haven't figured out how to edit the logos, if it's even possible. So here we are. With a solid management foundation that Krisalis had built up with the last few titles, and a promising new state-of-the-art 3D engine with 3DFX capabilities, it seemed to me at the time that Krisalis' next game would probably be the ultimate football manager game. Because simultaneously, while developing UEFA Champions League, they had also begun developing a new management game for Windows 95. And that game is the next stop on our journey. By now we've reached that part of my videos where I try to solve a mystery. Krisalis' PFA license was supposed to yield yet another game, and it was a game that I looked forward to very much. Back in 96-97 I visited the in development section of Krisalis' website a stocky number of times to ogle the 4 screenshots of PFA Soccer Manager that was on the site and read the text a million times. It was supposedly a very detailed management game developed for Windows 95. The preview in PC Zone number 61 from March 1998 had screenshots of a 3D match engine. The publisher was still undecided, but the game was supposed to be released in the fall. And then there was nothing. That's not the big story, I guess. Games get cancelled, it's commonplace. But there are more oddities to this story. Using the Wayback Machine, I discovered that in January 1999 the Krisalis website lists this game as having been released by Psygnosis in 1998. Fast forward another year and the Krisalis' own softography has no mention of the game anymore. Krisalis released 2 more football management games before they eventually folded in 2001. Both were for the PlayStation. The first one, PFA Manager, looks like it could be the remnants of PFA Soccer Manager turned into a console game. The match screen kinda resembles the one from the preview. The second game was the PS1 port of EA Sports FA Premier League Manager 2000. They also did work on the GBA conversion of FA Premier League Stars, an action football game. At the beginning of the new millennia, new products were sparse. In a retro gamer feature, Neil Adamson recounts that working on conversions were not as much fun as working on original games, and eventually talent started leaving to work for other companies. Finally, on the last of November in 2001, Krisalis closed its doors. But I never stopped playing their footy games.